Welcome to Whispers of Dharma, where stories of karma, compassion, and rebirth are softly told to heal the soul. At 3:17 a.m., I heard a promise from another lifetime. The grandfather clock in my grandmother's attic ticked with an impossible rhythm, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, as if time itself was remembering. A single candle flickered without wind. Sandalwood incense burned, though I had lit none. And in the dusty mirror, for just a moment, I saw a face that wasn't mine, wearing clothes from a century past. If forgiveness is weakness, why does it heal the strongest wounds? The small town of Millbrook had always tasted of secrets. Rain fell in endless whispers against Victorian windows, painting the world in shades of grey and memory. I had returned here after 20 years, drawn by my grandmother's passing, and the weight of promises I couldn't remember making. Her house sat on Elm Street like a forgotten prayer, its walls stained with decades of weather and sorrow. The floorboards creaked with the weight of untold stories, and every room held the scent of lavender and regret. It was here that my grandmother, Elena Sinclair, had spent her final years speaking to shadows and calling out names no one recognized. The neighbors whispered about her madness, how she would stand at her bedroom window each evening, waiting for someone who never came, how she would set 2 plates for dinner, talking to an empty chair as if a beloved guest sat there. They said grief had broken her mind when my grandfather died 40 years ago, but I knew there was something deeper. The sound of rain against glass created a rhythm like heartbeats. The old radiator hissed and sighed like breathing, and somewhere in the walls, I could swear I heard whispers, in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. I had come to settle her estate, to sort through a lifetime of accumulated memories. But as I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, each step felt like walking deeper into a dream. The air grew thick with the weight of time, and my chest tightened with an emotion I couldn't name. Buddhist wisdom teaches that some souls carry burdens across lifetimes, and as I reached for the attic door, I felt the weight of something ancient pressing against my heart. A promise made in desperation, a love that refused to die, a karma that demanded completion. The door opened with a sound like sighing, and the smell of sandalwood surrounded me, like an embrace from the past. The attic held my grandmother's deepest secrets. Boxes of photographs, letters tied with faded ribbon, and journals written in her careful script. But it was the portrait that stopped my breath. A painting of a woman who looked exactly like me, dressed in 1,922nd clothing, standing beside a man whose eyes held infinite sadness. The nameplate read, Margaret and Thomas, 1924. Margaret, my middle name. The name my grandmother whispered. In her sleep, during her final days. I opened her journal with trembling hands. The entries began normally enough. Accounts of daily life, shopping lists, observations about the weather. But as the years progressed, the writing changed, became urgent, desperate. "The dreams are getting stronger," she had written. "I remember now. I was Margaret once. I loved him more than life itself, and I let him die. I broke my promise. Every night, he comes to me, asking why I didn't save him. The guilt follows me across lifetimes." The entries detailed a love story from the 1922nd. Margaret had been a nurse during the influenza pandemic. Thomas, a young doctor. They worked side by side, saving lives while falling desperately in love. He had proposed on a spring evening, promising her a life of healing and hope. But the pandemic was merciless. When Thomas fell ill, Margaret faced an impossible choice. The hospital had only one dose of experimental medicine left. A child lay dying in the next room. Thomas begged her to save the child instead of him. The compassion in Margaret's heart won over her selfish love. She gave the medicine to the child and watched the man she loved slip away in the night. His final words were a promise. "Find me in the next life, Margaret. I'll be waiting. We'll have our chance then." But Margaret never forgave herself. The guilt consumed her remaining years. She died young, her heart broken by the weight of her choice. And according to my grandmother's journals, that guilt had followed her soul through every rebirth since. As I read, the candle flame grew brighter, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The scent of medical alcohol mixed with the sandalwood, and for a moment, I could hear the distant sound of hospital corridors, the soft sobbing of grief too deep for words. Rebirth had given them both new chances, but healing requires more than time. It requires forgiveness. And some promises span lifetimes, waiting for the right moment to be fulfilled. The photograph fell from between the journal pages. It was recent, taken just months ago. My grandmother stood beside a man I didn't recognize, but his eyes were the same as Thomas's in the painted portrait. The same infinite sadness, the same desperate love. On the back, in my grandmother's shaking handwriting, found him. Dr. David Chen, Millbrook General Hospital. He doesn't remember yet, but karma never forgets. My hands shook as I read the final journal entry, dated just 1 week before her death. Margaret, if you're reading this, then the rebirth cycle has brought you back. I couldn't complete our karma in this lifetime. The guilt was too strong, the fear too deep. But you can. He's waiting at the hospital. Room 314. He's been waiting for a century. The clock struck midnight. The house fell silent except for my heartbeat and the whisper of rain against glass. But in that silence, I heard something else. Footsteps in the hallway below. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was climbing the stairs. I knew, with the certainty that comes from the soul's memory, that I was no longer alone in the house. The footsteps reached the landing, paused, then continued toward the attic door. Buddhist wisdom tells us that unfinished karma draws souls together across lifetimes. That love and guilt are equally powerful forces in shaping our destiny. And as the footsteps stopped just outside the attic door, I understood that this moment had been inevitable since the day Margaret made her choice. The door handle turned slowly, the hinges creaked, and in the doorway stood a figure I recognized, though I had never seen him before. Tall, dark hair touched with gray, eyes that held a century of waiting. "Margaret," he said, and his voice carried the weight of lifetimes. "I've been looking for you." But here's what made my blood turn to ice. He was wearing a hospital ID badge. Dr. David Chen, Millbrook General Hospital, and in his hand, he held a single red rose that hadn't been there moments before. The same rose Thomas had given Margaret the night he proposed. The same rose she had pressed between the pages of her medical textbook and kept until the day she died. "You remember?" I whispered, and the words felt like they came from Margaret's throat, not mine. "I've always remembered," he said. "Every lifetime, every rebirth. I've been waiting for you to remember too." Time folded in on itself. Past and present merged. And I realized that the healing we both needed could only come through facing what we had left unfinished. The next 3 days blurred together, like scenes from a half-remembered dream. David came to the house each evening after his hospital shift, and together we pieced together the fragments of our shared past. His memories were clearer than mine. He remembered Margaret's laugh, the way she hummed while working, the softness of her hand in his during their brief, stolen moments together. He remembered the pain of dying slowly, watching her face as she chose the child's life over his. I wasn't angry. He told me as we sat in my grandmother's parlor, rain drumming against the windows. Even as I died, I wasn't angry. I was proud of her. Proud that the woman I loved had such compassion, such strength. But I could feel Margaret's guilt living inside my chest, like a physical weight. The knowledge that she could have saved him, should have saved him, that her choice, however noble, had destroyed their chance at happiness. She never forgave herself, I said, and my voice cracked with emotion that belonged to another time. Neither did my grandmother. The karma of that guilt has followed us through every lifetime. David leaned forward, his eyes intense with understanding. That's why I'm here. That's why we keep finding each other. Not for revenge, not for blame, for healing, for forgiveness, for closure. He showed me photographs from his own life, how he had become a doctor in every incarnation, driven by an inexplicable need to heal others, how he had never married, always waiting for someone. He couldn't quite remember how he had felt incomplete until the day he walked into my grandmother's room and recognized her soul. She was dying, he said softly. Lung cancer. Terminal. But when I introduced myself as her doctor, she looked at me and said, "Thomas, is it really you?" And suddenly, I remembered everything. Buddhist wisdom teaches that recognition between souls transcends physical form. That love, once true, creates bonds that death cannot break. But it also teaches that healing requires more than recognition. It requires action, choice, the courage to break cycles of pain. On the third night, as we sat in the attic, surrounded by my grandmother's memories, David took my hands in his. They were warm, steady, familiar in a way that made my heart ache. "There's something you need to know," he said. "Something your grandmother couldn't tell you. The child Margaret saved, the one she chose over me. One." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. That child grew up to become Dr. Harrison Wells. He discovered the cure for influenza that saved millions of lives. Margaret's choice didn't just save one child, it saved the world. The weight of karma shifted in my chest. Not burden, but purpose. Not guilt, but grace. Margaret's compassion had rippled across decades, healing more souls than she could have imagined. "Do you see?" David whispered. "There was never anything to forgive. Your choice was perfect. It was love. It was exactly what the universe needed." But even as understanding dawned, I felt something else approaching. A presence in the house that made the air shimmer and the shadows dance. Our conversation had awakened something that had been waiting for this moment of recognition. The temperature in the attic plummeted. Our breath misted in the suddenly frigid air, and every surface began to gleam with frost that shouldn't exist in summer. "Do you feel that?" David whispered, his grip on my hands tightening. I nodded, unable to speak. The presence was stronger now, filling the room with the weight of decades of unfinished business. The photograph of Margaret and Thomas began to glow with an inner light, and the painted figures seemed to move, their eyes following our every gesture. Margaret. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the rafters, and seeming to rise from the floorboards themselves. Margaret, you must choose again. The attic around us shifted, the walls dissolving into mist. Suddenly we were standing in a hospital ward. From a century past, oil lamps flickered on wooden tables. The smell of carbolic acid and desperation hung heavy in the air. I was Margaret again, wearing the starched white uniform of a nurse, my hair pinned beneath a simple cap. David was Thomas, younger, his face flushed with fever, lying in the narrow hospital bed. In the bed beside him, a child gasped for breath. No more than 7 years old, his small chest rising and falling with desperate effort. Between us, on a metal tray, sat a single vial of medicine. Choose, the voice commanded. Save the man you love, or save the child who will heal the world. But know this time that your choice will echo across every lifetime. Choose wisely. Choose with forgiveness in your heart. Thomas looked at me with eyes full of understanding. Margaret, he whispered, his voice weak but steady. Save the child. Save him, and forgive yourself for loving me enough to let me go. But this time was different. This time I understood the true nature of forgiveness. It wasn't about erasing the pain of choice. It was about accepting that love sometimes requires sacrifice, and that compassion for the many can coexist with love for the one. I picked up the vial with steady hands. I choose both, I said, my voice clear and strong. I choose compassion for the child, and I choose forgiveness for myself. I choose to believe that love doesn't end with death, and that some promises span lifetimes. I gave the medicine to the child, watching as his breathing eased and color returned to his cheeks. Then I turned to Thomas, took his hand in mine, and leaned close to whisper. Forgiveness isn't about changing the past. It's about freeing the future. I forgive myself. I forgive this choice. And I promise that our love will find its way across every lifetime until healing is complete. Thomas smiled, and in his eyes I saw not death, but transformation. Thank you, he breathed, for choosing love. Always choosing love. The hospital ward shimmered and dissolved. We were back in the attic, but everything had changed. The air was warm again, filled with the scent of roses and sandalwood. And standing before us, translucent but unmistakably real, were the spirits of Margaret and Thomas. They were young again, radiant with a light that seemed to come from within. Margaret's face was peaceful, free from the guilt that had haunted her. Thomas's eyes sparkled with joy, no longer shadowed by sorrow. "The karma is complete," Margaret said, her voice like music. "The healing is done. We are free to love, without the weight of the past." But as the spirits began to fade, I felt a terrible pulling sensation in my chest. The price of their freedom, I realized with growing horror, was our separation. David and I had been vessels for their unfinished business. With their karma resolved, we would return to being strangers. "No," I whispered, reaching for David as I felt him slipping away. "This isn't right. We found each other. We love each other." The pulling grew stronger. David's hand in mine was becoming insubstantial, like mist. His eyes were confused, as if he was forgetting who I was, who we had been together. "Margaret," Thomas's spirit said gently, "rebirth gave us this chance to heal. But healing sometimes means letting go. The love we shared will always exist, but it cannot trap you in the past." "But what about our love?" I cried, feeling David's presence fading. "What about the love that David and I have built? The future we could have?" Margaret smiled, her spirit growing brighter. "True love creates its own karma," she said. "If what you and David have is real, it will survive the healing. But it must be your choice, not the echo of ours." The attic filled with blinding light. I felt myself falling, spinning through time and space until everything went dark. I woke in my grandmother's bed as dawn light filtered through lace curtains. The rain had stopped. The house was silent, except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. The memories of the past 3 days felt like fragments of a vivid dream. Had David been real? Had any of it happened? I stumbled to the attic, my heart pounding with desperate hope. The boxes were still there, but they were different now. Lighter somehow, less heavy with sorrow. The portrait of Margaret and Thomas was gone, leaving only a faint outline on the dusty wall. My grandmother's journal lay open to a page I hadn't seen before. The handwriting was different, younger, filled with joy instead of regret. The forgiveness has been given. The healing is complete. Margaret and Thomas are free to find their eternal rest. But love creates its own destiny. If two souls choose each other freely, without the weight of past karma, then they create new possibilities, new chances for happiness, new forms of compassion. I closed the journal, and walked to the window. Outside, Millbrook was waking up to a world washed clean by rain. The sun painted everything golden, and for the first time in days, I felt truly at peace. Buddhist wisdom teaches that healing is not about erasing the past, but about transforming our relationship to it. That forgiveness is not a destination, but a journey. That love, in its purest form, wants only freedom and joy for the beloved. I understood now that Margaret's guilt had been her prison, and my grandmother's obsession with the past had been hers. But forgiveness had opened the doors. Compassion had provided the key, and rebirth had given us all the chance to choose love over fear. The doorbell rang, clear and musical in the morning air. I made my way downstairs slowly, my heart both heavy and light. On the porch stood a man I recognized, but who was somehow different. David, but not the David haunted by Thomas's memories. This was David Chen, simply himself, holding a cup of coffee and wearing an uncertain smile. "I'm sorry to bother you so early," he said, his voice familiar but free of the weight it had carried. "I'm Dr. Chen from the hospital. I was your grandmother's physician. I heard you were in town settling her estate, and I wanted to offer my condolences." She was a remarkable woman. I studied his face, searching for any sign of recognition. There was something in his eyes, a spark of curiosity, of possibility, but no memory of our shared nights in the attic, no echo of Thomas's voice. "Would you like to come in?" I asked, and my voice was steady, hopeful. "I was just making breakfast." He smiled, and in that smile I saw the possibility of a love that was entirely our own, free from the past, free to grow into whatever two people might choose to create together. "I'd like that very much," he said. 6 months later, David and I were married in my grandmother's garden. It was a small ceremony, just a few friends and family, but the air was filled with joy and the scent of roses. As we exchanged vows, I felt a presence I recognized, not intrusive or demanding, but gentle, loving, the spirits of Margaret and Thomas watching with approval, as two souls chose love freely, without the weight of karma. But here's what will make your soul shiver. That evening, as we danced in the garden, David pulled me close and whispered, "I keep having the strangest dreams. Dreams of a hospital from long ago, and a nurse who saved everyone but herself. Dreams of a love that lasted lifetimes." I looked into his eyes and saw a flicker of recognition. Not memory exactly, but understanding. The deep knowledge that souls carry of all they have experienced. Maybe, I said softly, some dreams are just the universe's way of reminding us that healing is possible, that forgiveness can transform everything, that compassion creates miracles. He smiled and spun me in a circle as the first stars appeared overhead. Then, let's keep dreaming, he said. Let's dream of a love so pure it heals the past and blesses the future. As we danced, I felt something settle in my chest, the weight I had carried without knowing it. Margaret's guilt, my grandmother's sorrow, generations of unfinished karma, all of it simply dissolved. Buddhist wisdom teaches that every act of forgiveness sends ripples across time, that every choice made with compassion creates possibilities for healing that we may never see. Margaret's choice to save the child had saved millions. My choice to forgive her choice had freed us all. Some say that on quiet evenings, when the wind is just right, you can still hear whispers. In my grandmother's garden, words of gratitude from souls set free. Promises that karma honored creates space for new love. Reminders that rebirth is not just about second chances, but about the infinite compassion of a universe that believes in happy endings. Because when we choose forgiveness, we don't just heal ourselves. We heal the past. We heal the future. We heal the very fabric of what it means to love and be loved. If you believe that karma always guides us, please subscribe and leave a reflection so we can awaken together. This is Whispers of Dharma. Every story is a seed of wisdom. See you again in the next whisper.